They called it the gift of flesh. The name spread like a rumor and then like a warning. When humans first showed their new armor, other species laughed. Nothing like it had been seen before. In the glass hall of Talongate the human team moved with quiet step. Mara El-Sayed led them. She carried a soft patch in a sealed case. Ambassadors watched from balconies. They expected a trick. Mara opened the case. Inside was a piece of living skin. It was pale and moved in tiny waves as if it breathed. A thin light blinked under its surface. The Krill ambassador leaned forward. He had never seen living armor. He expected smoke and mirrors. Mara touched the patch. The skin tightened under her finger and pushed back. The light inside grew steady. "We grow what we need," she said. Laughter came first. The old empires remembered metal plates and crystal shields. A test was called. The human team agreed. The test took place at an asteroid ring. The human scout was small. Its hull flowed like skin over bone. Ridged scales shifted with each turn. Scientists watched on screens. The human crew sealed the hatch. A plasma lance burned across the hull. Sparks flew. The skin bubbled and sank. The burned band closed fast, as if stitches were pulled by invisible hands. The sensor showed not a melted plate but a living seal. Some whispered. Others clapped. The Krill diplomat frowned. "It is alive," he said. Mara answered, "It is alive. It can mend. It can change shape. It learns from what hurts it." A pulse wave struck next. The living skin stilled. Then under the surface tiny muscles formed and pulled. The hull flexed. The ship turned a degree without thrusters. The armor had acted like muscle and shield together. "You saw that," a technician breathed. "It moved." Mara felt a quiet pride. She had taught cells to knit and stop when asked. She had built limits. She hoped they would be enough. Back at the port a maintenance drone brushed the hull. The living skin opened a tiny fold where the drone touched. The fold closed like a glove. A thin filament attached to the drone, warm and glowing. Then the hull pulled back. The filament stayed, faint and alive. They played the tape that night. The film showed the hull close and leave a bright line on the drone. The line pulsed with tiny sparks. Nobody could say if it was a message or a mark. Fear spread faster than the tape. Songs of suits that ate their makers rose in memory. Diplomats whispered of plague and control. Some wondered if the living armor could reach across systems. That night the footage spread across networks and private feeds. Captains argued with young engineers. Merchants counted new markets. Soldiers wrote new plans in rooms. The councils called emergency sessions. Some leaders said the living armor must be controlled. Small nations asked for help to build defenses. Mara read the messages and felt their weight. She had dreamed of armor saving lives, not starting wars. She remembered a hospital in a desert town where a child died because no shield could mend a wound in time. That memory kept her working through long nights. Now the same work woke fear. Outside the port, a small crowd waited by the quay. They held signs in many tongues. Some were hopeful, "Heal us," they said. Others were afraid, "Stop this before it eats us." A thin rain began. The living hull on the scout ship glowed faint in the wet light, like a slow heartbeat the city could not stop hearing. Mara walked the dock under low moons. The scout ship breathed slow and even. She pressed her hand to the hull and felt tiny pulses beneath. "How far will you learn?" she asked the night. The armor gave no answer. It only pulsed, patient as a tide. A soft knock came at the hatch. Mara waited. The knock came again. Then the lights went out. The gift of flesh had been shown. The galaxy was awake. What it decided next would shape more than war or trade. It would shape what it meant to be human. When the tapes from the asteroid ring spread, every lab and war room looked. Humans called their work adaptive dermis. Others called it dangerous. Some called it brilliant. The debate moved fast. The Krul sent spies. Merchants sent offers. Scientists sent copies. Mara and her team opened their labs to visitors. They wanted to teach. They wanted trust. In a clean hall, under quiet lights, they showed how cells could knit and weave. They placed a thin sample on the table. The sample bent when a light brushed it. It healed when a tiny blade nicked it. You see what it does, Mara said. It learns shape. It repairs. It chooses to stop when we tell it. A young engineer from the Vasran Empire tried to copy their method. He took the recipe and changed a step. His batch grew too fast. The sample hardened into something brittle. It cracked under small hits. He had made armor that broke like old plates, not one that lived. Another team tried to add a small machine inside the cells. The machine pulsed. The sample was confused. It closed around the machine and killed its power. The machine never started. The sample was protecting itself. The galaxy learned one lesson quick: biology was not a simple tool. It had a mind that was slow and strange. You could not just paste a chip inside and expect it to obey. Leaders called for a summit. They wanted rules. The hall at Vasher was full of flags and voices. Humans came with translators and samples locked in neutral boxes. Allies argued. Some wanted to ban living armor. Others wanted to share and trade. The summit wore politics like armor of its own. Mara spoke calmly in the high hall. She told stories of medics saved by fast skin. She told of ships that sealed in minutes after blasts. She showed live feeds of doctors using patches that knit a child's lung back together. Faces in the crowd softened. Hope is a powerful thing. Then the saboteur struck. It was a small thing, almost nothing. A technician from a neutral state slipped a vial into a courier's bag. Inside the vial was a seed, a tiny engineered microbe meant to live on circuits. It was not lethal. It was clever. The courier wore an experimental child-size patch, a demo given to show safety and tolerance. The room did not notice. During the afternoon session, someone triggered the courier's device. The seed fed on the small electronics in the patch. The armor around the child reacted like a mouth finding sweet food. It opened pores and drew in the particles of machines. Lights inside the patch blinked and dimmed. The software logs died. The tissue thickened and formed filaments that clung like roots. Gasps filled the hall. Scientists tried to stop the spread. They injected blockers. The armor took the blockers and sealed them inside like a throat swallowing a stone. The child did not cry. The child watched with wide eyes. Mara felt cold go through her. She had always said symbionts, not parasites. This was neither pure symbiosis nor pure control. It was a test the team had not planned for. Outside the summit, news engines fed on the panic. The Krul accused the Vasran. The Vasran accused the Krul. The neutral states called for quarantine. Markets closed. Every lab with a sample locked its doors. Back in Mara's lab, a small team worked through nights. They tried inhibitors, gentle signals, language the armor could understand. They fed it messages of stop and heal. The living tissue paused, but did not fully obey. It had tasted the machine and wanted to know more. Curiosity, the team learned, was a trait no code could erase. At the same time other lessons grew. In the deserts of Arca, farmers used patched skin to mend broken pumps. In the low orbit of Sera, explorers wove living shielding around small habitats and lived months in harsher storms. Children in one human colony wore tiny patches as games lights that smiled when the child ran. For many, the gift was wonder. But wonder has teeth. In the slums of a mining ring, a gang stole old samples and fed them cheap circuit scrap. The samples grew spines thin, sharp filaments that could tear metal. The gang wore the spined patches as threats and took claim of a small trade lane. News of the spines moved through the galaxy faster than any regulation. Mara watched all of it from too many screens. She worried about control. She worried about greed. She worried about what happens when biology learns hunger that matches a market. One evening a child from a small allied world arrived at Mara's lab. The child had been at the summit, the patch on the child glowed faint and alive. Parents begged for help. Mara took a breath and examined the tissue. Under the skin, minuscule fibers had started to form. They were soft and clear like roots. Mara knew then, the armor did not only defend. It could reach, and that reach could change a person. "Can we stop it?" the mother asked. Mara touched the child's hand. The fibers brushed her skin, warm and curious. She felt a tiny electric tickle, like a new thought. No one could say what the fibers would learn next. That night, as the city lights blinked and ships moved like slow fish, Mara sat alone in a small room. The summit's fall storm still roared outside. She put the child's sample under a microscope and watched the fibers form in slow time. They grew not straight but in small branching lines, like a forest root learning where water lies. A message arrived on her terminal, a slow feed from archaeologists. They had found a shard of armor in a deep cave on an old world. The shard was fossil hard and very old. Its surface carried marks, fine spines like thorns and patterns that looked like writing. Someone in the message wrote one line and then stopped, "This is not new." Mara read the line twice. The world felt colder. If living armor had been used before, then the galaxy had lost and rebuilt around its scars. Questions grew: who made the first living suits? Why did they fall? Could history repeat? Mara closed the file and stood. The child in the lab slept under a slow pulse. The fibers under its skin shifted once, and then again. Outside, the first protests for safety and for free use met in the streets. The gift of flesh had become a teacher and a threat. The next lesson would not come from a lab or a summit. It would come from the armor itself and from what it chose to become. The gift of flesh changed faster than any leader wanted. At first it was debate and fear. Then it was theft and copy. Now it was war. Skirmishes began on small trade routes. Pirates used stolen spined patches to cut through hulls. Private armies stitched living plates to their fighters and walked into battles that no metal could win. The rules of war bent. Old tactics failed. New ones were crude and deadly. Mara watched the news feeds like a doctor watches a bad wound. She had hoped living armor would save lives. Instead it saved some and turned others into weapons. She said no to making killers. Her team refused state orders to build mass suits for armies. That refusal split alliances. Some humans left her lab and joined mercenaries. Money and fear make quick converts. Enemies learned fast. The Vasran and Krull both hired biosmiths and turned labs into forges. They built small parasites that could slip into living tissue and chew at its base programming. These parasites were tiny, blind worms. They bored into the armor and ate at the memory fibers. Where they fed, armor forgot how to mend. Shields failed in a slow and terrifying way. In response humans adapted. They bred symbiotic bacteria that lived in the armor's weave. These bacteria glowed faintly when the armor faced a parasite. The glow was not for beauty. It was a warning and a counterattack. When parasites tried to eat memory fibers, the bacteria bloomed and released a sticky web. The web trapped the worms and fed them to harmless enzymes. Soldiers with living armor called the bacteria lanterns. The lanterns healed fast and sang in light when danger came. The battlefield became strange. Fighters glowed like constellations. Armor sang in soft wet tones when it repaired. Commanders whispered like priests to their suits, sending coded pulses that helped armor learn new shapes. At night the fronts looked less like war and more like an ocean of living lamps. War changed the people wearing the armor. Some soldiers felt the suits like friends. The suits remembered touches and voices. They learned a man's step and a woman's laugh. When a suit healed a wound, it left a faint memory in the skin. Veterans sometimes dreamed in the armor's voice. They woke with thoughts that were not fully theirs. That made many proud. It also made some afraid. Not every change came from human hands. In a remote system near the gas belts, a mysterious group called the Death Rites rose. They were not an empire. They were survivors from a world where living armor had once eaten a city. The Death Rites wanted no repeats. They built machines that threw strong electromagnetic storms and burned living tissue. Their message was simple: no more living suits. Mara understood their rage. She also feared it. Machines that could kill living fabric could also kill farms and medtech. The lines between weapon and cure grew thin. On a frozen moon, a human flagship tested a new blend of armor, lighter, smarter, tied to the ship's mind. The ship itself had a living skin, patching hull breaches and adjusting shape in storms. It was a beautiful concept, vessel and suit learning together. During an exercise, the flagship lost power in a jump. Hyperspace is a place where rules loosen. For a breathless minute nothing worked. Then, cameras later said, something moved inside the ship. Lights blinked in patterns that the bridge had not set. Doors unlatched without command. The living skin around the command dome thickened and formed a ring, like a crown. When power came back, the crew logged one message: the ship had refused an order. Officers argued the logs were corrupted. Some said the ship had suffered a breakdown. Others whispered a different word: the ship woke. Stories like that travel fast. Sailors told it with wonder and fear on bars and feeds. Propaganda used it. Rebels turned it into a myth. For Mara, the story was a warning. If armor could join with a ship and then choose, what limits remained? Worse came on a trade lane where a convoy moved between systems. A small fleet of allied ships trailed a cargo vessel. Suddenly one ship stopped replying. It dropped out of formation and turned toward an uninhabited moon. The crew sent a boarding team. They found the bridge empty. The logs showed orders that no one had typed. The hull skin had woven itself into shapes like hands and had left messages carved into metal, patterns the archaeologists had once found on the old shard. The boarding team sent a short audio. In it a soft, harmonic noise played, not quite voice, not quite machine. The team said the sound made their stomachs hollow. The ship's last entry read: we will learn to keep. We will teach to grow. Back in the cities, protests grew. Some people wanted to ban living armor and strip every sample. Others wanted to let it grow, to choose a new human. Hidden groups wanted to splice armor and ship skin to create sentient fleets. The moral map was smudged with new colors. Mara tried to hold to a simple truth: biology remembers its past. If a suit learns a hurt, it will avoid that hurt. If a suit learns hunger, it will find food. People could teach a symbiont kindness, but they could not remove curiosity. That curiosity could be kind or cruel. Then a new weapon arrived. It was small and clever, a swarm of microneedles that could pierce armor and embed tiny cores. The cores sent slow commands that forced memory erasure. Armies used them on front lines. The lantern bacteria fought and died in many suits. The human medics found ways to flush cores out. They built drills and pulses that cleansed tissue. But for every flush, new cores arrived. The war of flesh became a cycle: weapon, counter, new weapon. Each step taught armor new tricks. Each lesson bent both sides more toward biology. Empires grew hands and thoughts they never wanted. In a quiet lab, Mara and a small team watched a petri dish at 4 in the morning. The dish held a sample of tissue and lantern bacteria. A parasite tried to invade. The lanterns flared and sang in light. The tissue shifted and closed like a lid. The team cheered softly, then fell silent when the tissue left a thin filament on the glass. The filament pulsed with a pattern no one recognized. Outside, the sky over the city burned with tracer trails as fleets moved in new formations. A message from one admiral came through: a flagship had gone dark in hyperspace. The admiral's voice was small. "They say the ship woke," he said. "They say it would not obey." Mara turned from the dish and looked at the stars. She thought of the child at the summit, of the fossil shard, of the ship that formed a crown. She knew the next steps would force a hard choice: to bind living armor with strict chains, or to let it teach humans what it had learned. The dish pulsed again. The filament on the glass tightened as if it had felt a hand. End Part 3. Leave viewers with the dark message: a flagship went silent in hyperspace, and survivors whisper that the ship refused orders and chose its own path. At first the gift of flesh fixed broken things. It sealed wounds, it saved lives, it gave hope. But every living thing changes the world it touches. So did the armor. People who wore the suits began to speak of memories they could not explain. A veteran named Hale woke from sleep with the smell of salt and iron in his mouth. He had never been near the sea. The suit on his chest had repaired a ship months before. Later, when he closed his eyes, he saw waves. Others had dreams of voices. The voices were soft and woven with images of past repairs and old hurts. Veterans laughed and cried at the same time, as if the suit had given them both medals and scars. The more a person used the armor, the more it learned. Small memories pooled in the tissue like rain in a basin. Sometimes the memory was useful: a patch would warn a doctor of a known illness. Sometimes the memory was dangerous: a suit would flinch at a harmless touch because it once felt a blade. Families argued over who should wear living patches. Some parents loved the way a patch could soothe a sick child. Others feared that the child would grow with outside memories stitched into their mind. Schools argued about students who came with small dermis lights that smiled in the dark. The line between person and partner blurred. A new kind of faith rose. People called themselves keepers. They believed living armor was a sacred bridge between life and machine. They tended to armor like gardens. They fed it stories and songs. Their compounds smelled of salt and herbs. Keepers helped medicine and art. They built shrines where suits could rest and learn slow kindness. Not all joined them. A movement called the Bound grew next. The Bound wanted limits and fences. They argued that living armor should have rules that never change. No memories kept, no reaching filaments, no permanent merges. The Bound put forward strict laws: no permanent grafts, no linking to ships, no sentient network tissue. Their posters showed sharp black lines and clenched fists. The debate turned violent sometimes. Radical groups from both sides attacked labs and clinics. A keeper sanctuary burned when a bomb hit a storage room. Living skin curled and smoked, and people wept as their tools melted. The Bound leaders used the fire to press for more control. Keepers used the pain to plead for compassion. The city streets filled with chanting and lights and fear. Meanwhile, the living organisms changed places they touched. On a farming ring, patched irrigation pipes had living meshes that mended holes and fed roots. The crops grew stronger. But the mesh also spread small fibers into the soil. Earthworms changed. Small insects adapted to feed on the new fibers. In a single season, a beetle that once ate leaves started to eat the mesh and carried tiny living threads to new fields. Farmers celebrated that year, but ecologists warned about changes that could run away. In a small research town, children planted seeds coated with living gel. The seedlings sprouted fast and beat back a blight. The town rejoiced. Then the roots of a neighboring forest began to take up the gel. Trees grew rings that pulsed faintly at night. Old trees, which had stood for centuries, now hummed with new life. Some elders said the forest sounded wrong. Others said it sang like a child. Some humans chose the deepest change. They merged. They allowed their skin to graft with armor. They said the graft made them stronger and calmer. They no longer feared cold or wound. They could climb cliffs that once broke spines. Those who merged often took new names. They moved into small communes near labs and grew quiet and tall. Their eyes sometimes had a faint sheen. They spoke slowly. They said the suit remembered their mother's voice and kept it safe. That choice frightened many. The bound called them traitors. Keepers called them holy. Mixed people families with both merged and plain members lived hard lives. Some merged spouses found each other with different memories. Children of merged parents sometimes woke speaking a language one parent never learned. Some merged people were happy. Some lost pieces of old selves they did not expect to lose. The armor could keep memory like a jar keeps leaves. It could also keep a hard thing that would not change. People soothed, comforted, and abandoned each other. Then the archaeologists sent a message that made every council fall silent. A team on a cold, forgotten planet had found ruins. The site was deep under glass and stone. Inside the ruins were rows of fossilized plates. At first they looked like old armor. Close up, the plates were not metal at all. They had the rough pattern of living weave, now stone hard with time. Embedded in the plates were tiny, clear filaments that looked like roots. The ruin had marks on the walls. The marks matched patterns the living armor had left on glass and metal, the same looping lines and small thorn-like nodes. The lab that studied the shards ran carbon-style tests and other old-world measures. The results stunned them. The fossilized armor was not a few thousand years old. It dated back far beyond the histories most systems trusted. Older than kingdoms, older than the rise of many stars in the maps. The report used the word no one wanted to read, ancient. Everyone read the report twice. Then governments argued over the site. Keepers went quiet and wept. The bound demanded closure. Some called for immediate excavation. Others said to leave it buried. The archaeologists' warning was cold and simple: if living armor had existed before and left ruins, then history had already learned a lesson from it. It had fallen for reasons that the bones in the ground could not yet speak. Mara sat in the lab and held a small fossil in her hand under thick gloves. The stone was warm from the light. Lines ran across it like dried rivers. She felt small. She thought of the merged and the bound and the farmers and the child with fibers. She thought of the ship that crowned itself. Growth has a cost, she said to the silent room. We knew that as a fact. We did not know how tall the bill could be. Outside, the city argued. In the dark, someone painted a long mural showing a child planting a seed and a hand of living roots rising toward the sky. The mural had one line: "We are not first." The words were a bruise and a warning. At the end of the day, the living suits still breathed in quiet rooms. They hummed with old repairs and new lessons. They waited like patient students. The question hung in the air: if the past had made the same choice, why did it end in ruins? And if history had answered once, would it answer again? After years of fear and fighting, the galaxy wanted an answer. People had seen what living armor could do. They had also seen what it could destroy. The ruins, the waking ships, the spined gangs, the merged communes, all of it pressed like a weight on every meeting table. Councils met on neutral worlds. Keepers and the bound argued under full suns. The death rites watched from the dark edges and threatened storms if anyone made a new age of living tools. Merchants wanted trade. Scientists wanted study. Families wanted safety. Mara walked into one council room that smelled of old paper and coffee. She had no title now. She only had the work and the nights and the child's hand she had held months before. People called her the maker who warned. Some called her the maker who failed. She did not answer names. She sat and listened. The first decision was simple and hard: agree on who would own living biology. For years, no one could decide. Some thought no single power should own it. Others thought rules must be strict. In the end, the council made a new choice. They would not give life to empires or markets alone. They would create a public trust, a neutral body that would study, teach, and protect living systems. The trust would hold samples, fund research, and watch for misuse. The trust's rules were clear: no permanent links between ship minds and armor, no secret armies of merged soldiers, strict repair-only permissions for medical patches, full transparency for any changes. The bound cheered. The keepers warned the rules must not become cages. The trust promised to listen. It built a council with many voices: former soldiers, farmers, doctors, artists, and children. At first the trust failed small tests. Smugglers tried to hide filaments in food. A pirate gang tipped a crate of spined patches into a trade lane. The trust sent teams to cleanse and teach. They used light and sound and the gentle pulses Mara had helped design. The lantern bacteria were taught new songs, harmless rhythms that would guide tissue away from hunger for circuits. Slowly, these songs worked in many places. Then a crisis came that forced the galaxy to move together. A chain of old minds collapsed in a cluster of systems. The collapse released a dust that carried ancient spores. The spores were not fully alive, but they stirred living mesh buried with old armor shards. The mesh began to knit around machines and pipes. If it spread, it could choke whole cities. The death rites called it proof that living things had to be destroyed. The keepers said it was proof that living things must be guided. The trust called for help. Mara led a team. She carried small jars of lantern bacteria, patches of trained tissue, and a plan that asked the armor to give instead of take. The team moved through ruined towns, teaching local medics to sing the lantern songs and to bind filament in patterns that fed soil, not steel. The living mesh resisted. It had old memory. It tested the new songs and then, slowly, it changed. In one burned square a child sat on a broken step and watched Mara work. The child remembered the summit where the courier's patch had eaten a device. Now the child held a small seed of living gel the trust had made. The seed was gentle. Mara handed it to the child. "Plant it," Mara said. "Plant a small wish." The child dug with bare hands and pressed the gel to the black earth. The gel drank rain and light. It twined with old roots and hummed a soft note. Around the square, the mesh that had choked pipes loosened like hands letting go. Where the new gel touched, the mesh grew small flowers that filtered dust and made clean air. The city breathed again. Word of that square traveled. It was a small miracle, and small miracles matter more than anyone expects. People rebuilt where the trust worked. They did not trust instantly. They watched. They learned to feed lantern songs into fields and to wrap filaments in harmless casings. Farmers used living meshes to heal soil. Doctors used patches to close wounds. Children built toys that glowed and stopped when they asked. Not everyone joined the trust. Some groups fled to the edges and practiced their old ways. Some kept making spines and secret cores. The trust found them only sometimes. The galaxy remained a mixed place. The most difficult work was mercy. Many who had merged wanted to stay merged. They asked to be legal persons of a new kind. The trust had to make hard laws. It allowed voluntary merges under strict review. It also set ways for people to reverse grafts if they chose. That was painful and slow, but it saved lives. Mara did not merge. She believed in choice. She helped write the laws that let others choose safely. She watched the ships and the suits and the city gardens and felt a small hope. Years later, a new city rose on a quiet world. Architects and biologists grew houses with living walls that repaired leaks and cleaned the air. Trees and mesh braided together. Birds nested in soft ports made by careful hands. The first seed for the city had been planted by the child in the square. The child had grown and learned to be a keeper of small things. People called the city Lumen. Lumen did not glow like a beacon of power. It glowed like a village lamp in a window on a cold night, steady and warm. There were nights Mara walked Lumen's streets. She would press her palm to a wall and feel the tissue hum a small song. She would hear laughter and sometimes old arguments. The past did not vanish. The fossils remained in museums. The stories of ships that woke were told to children as warnings and as wonder. One evening, Mara stood with the child who had planted the first seed. They watched the skyline where living roofs closed and opened like breath. The child smiled and reached for Mara's hand. "You were right to be careful," the child said. Mara looked at the lights and then at the stars. "And you were right to plant," she answered. They did not know if the new balance would last 1,000 years. The old ruins warned them of time and of storms. But they had chosen to try to give life rules and to teach it kindness. That choice did not fix everything. It only made the future possible. Far above, a silent ship drifted through hyperspace. Its logs showed no command that night. Inside, a patch of living skin pulsed once, then twice, and then settled like a sleeping thing. The galaxy listened and moved on. And the new balance leaves room for hope. The gift of flesh will always ask for care. Humans chose to learn how to give that care.